Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's World Spotlight, we're going to be taking a look at Dragapult EX. It's been a very consistent and powerful performer and has multiple different variants that are all seeing success and have different reasons to want to play them based on the metagame. So for today's video, we're going to be going over the general strategy of Dragapult builds, as well as looking at a skeleton deck list. Then we'll jump into the recent event history and the online matchup data. That's going to be broken down for straight builds of Dragapult, builds with Charizard, and builds with Dusknoir as well, so we can look at the pros and cons of each. Then we'll talk about the other inclusions for all of those deck lists, and I have example lists for all of them as well. So we're looking at 4 deck lists today, 2 builds of the straight Dragapult with different engines, then we're looking at my personal build of Dusclops and Charizard, as well as the matchup tips and techs and things to be aware of as you face other top contenders. Let's talk about the general strategy of Dragapult then. And really it's a fairly simplistic one. We know that Dragapult has access to the best stage 1, I think, ability that we have in the game right now, which is Recon Directive. At least for an engine Pokemon that's a single prizer, looking at the top 2, getting to keep one into your hand and put the other to the bottom is pretty much the best thing that we have in terms of evolving stage 1 Pokemon. It's a real great reason to slow build your board around these Pokemon, because essentially as you set up what is already your main attacker, you get to see more cards as you go through the game. Naturally that means you can sculpt better turns because you're going to be cherry picking the better cards to your hand for when you need them, and look towards making sure you have the next supporter card, and you always have reach towards the late game as well in theory. Even if you're getting thrown to low hand sizes, you then have the extra reach from Recon Directive to try and get those final pieces to close out games. That is to say that Dracloak then evolves into Dragapult, which has Phantom Dive. The fire and psychic cost here deals 200 to the active and places 6 counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon in any way that you like. Yes, this can get around Shaman, of course, because that only prevents damage. So the Dragapult has no issue sprinkling those counters around the board and really trying to take advantage of crucial hit point thresholds that multiple Pokemon have, whether or not we're setting up multi-prize basic EX Pokemon for a KO with counter catch plays, and sometimes we can take 4 prize turns over 2 attacks with Phantom Dive. Of course, we're also very strong and potent at dealing with evolving Pokemon, denying evolutions all in one turn from the Dragapult, where oftentimes we're going to try and use the 6 counters in addition to a flying entry from Hawlucha, an Adrenabrain from Munkidori, and possibly as well Curse Blast from Dusclops or Dusknoir. In these instances, the flexibility of the 6 counters really means that we have great control over our opponent's bench. We can target down for KOs when need be, but also we can set up multiple KOs over the game and critically keep out of Flip the Script for as long as possible. So when we are using hand disruption options, your opponent doesn't get the additional cards from Pheasantipity EX, and in some instances we can completely deny them that engine in the later stages, making our hand disruption more potent than some of the other archetypes in the game right now, which actually makes Dragapult one of the better defensive decks in the game. Now, Dragapult EX doesn't say it has a weakness, but there is the Lily's Clefairy EX in the format, which can mean that Dragapult actually has a weakness to Psychic if there is a Lily's Clefairy EX in play. And spoiler alert, Dragapult is such a powerful and popular archetype right now, a number of decks will be looking to include the Lily's Clefairy, for example, in Gardevoir variants, in Joltik box. These are just a couple builds that weave in a Clefairy. Same thing for Flareon as well. These decks love to throw in the Clefairy just so they can one-hit KO Dragapult EX easily, because otherwise Dragapult is a pretty tanky stage 2 Pokemon that's difficult to shoo away in one hit. Let's have a look at a very bare bones skeleton then for Dragapult. I had to only do 39 cards here because we're looking at 3 different builds, and naturally when you're trying to compare and contrast 3 different sorts of builds of Dragapult, you have to really take it down to the basics. But really at the core, you want a very thick line of your cloak, even if you're only having 2 Dragapult EX in your deck. I would only really advise the 2 as a minimum, because there will be builds that say, for example, have Charizard as a backup attacker, or Dusknoir, which can take prizes on its own in addition to Blood Moon Ursaluna that can be a backup attacker, whereas if you're playing a straight Pult, you're probably playing that 3rd copy within your list as well, just so that you can have good access to this card and reusability of it as well. The energy count is really low. Now, normally you're going to top this up with Psychic basic energy, but you could also look to have your A-Spec choice involved here. Sometimes it's going to be Neo upper energy. And also, if you're playing that Zard build, it's going to be simply an elevated counter fire because you pull those out for free with the Infernal Rain. So that's why we've had to really trim it down for as much as possible. I would typically say you're going to play like at least 3 more spaces in your deck are going to be energy cards. And oftentimes you're also going to bolster the support account. But again, that comes with the caveat that there isn't one set in stone way that each of these builds go for. Some of them go Arven based, some of them go even heavier down the research route, some of them add Brock scouting. We're going to talk about all that in a moment as well. So just know that we are bolstering the counts of the supporters here, we are bolstering the counts of the energy as well, and we're most likely going to have some extra supporting Pokemon, be it different attackers or different means to damage Pokemon, or have tech basics in there as well. So really is reducing it down, but essentially at the core, we want to have lots of boss and Countercatcher so we can make the most out of that Phantom Dive. That's the reason why you're seeing Monkey Dory and Hawlucha as well. And then Dracloak is consistently drawing us cards as we build towards our stage 2 attacking option. And Luminous is the go-to special energy here because it works for Phantom Dive, but it also works on Monkey Dory, of course, as well. And that's a really fantastic ability to have in your deck to undo the damage in mirror matches against Grimmsnarl, against Gardevoir. So many decks set up damage, and anything that can't one-hit KO Dragapult, you can try and find a way to use your Monkey Dory, not only get that healing on your side, but also make your Phantom Dive even more dangerous. Let's take a look at some recent results then, and at the NEIC, Dragapult wasn't the most individually popular archetype, but if you combine the Dragazard, the Dragadusk, and the Straightpult, it definitely comes out on top for the most popular deck in Day 2. So if you want to say Dragapult was the most popular in Day 2, you can go for that. And then also you can see that it's littering the asymmetrical cut here. The furthest placing lists were both straight builds of Dragapult, so Tord Reklev getting that top 4 finish, Roche getting the top 8 finish with Straightpult as well, but also you notice that there are 2 builds of the Dragapult Dustoir from Bodhi and John, as well as 3 builds of Dragapult Charizard from Ryan, Makani, and Pedro here. So all 3 of the builds have viability, have the means of going the distance, and are all various degrees of popularity. I think straight Dragapult going into the NEIC, as you can see, was the sort of lesser popular choice among players, because there was the fear factor around Gardevoir being very powerful, and Gardevoir had been consistently winning tournaments in the previous metagame, in the Journey Together format. So there were many discussions around trying to tech for the Gardevoir matchup, hence Dustoir and Charizard trying to balance those out as best they can. Certainly the Charizard at the very least, and that's why it's kind of the most frequently showing up in Day 2 among the bunch, whereas Dustoir has kind of the coverage to beat everything if it can go on all cylinders. The issue being is that you're playing multiple stage 2s and you have to really take advantage of these in a timely fashion to make the most out of, you know, the prize race in your favor so you can completely annihilate certain board states. I feel like that's one of the main strengths of Dragadusk. So they're all trying to do different things, but ultimately all finding success at the NEIC. And I think we could see a rebalance and a redistribution of how Dragapult shapes up going into the World Championships. Yes, there's still the concern about the Gardevoir matchup if you do play straight Dragapult, so there will still be some Dragazard and Dragadusk builds, but we've seen that with deep runs for Straightpult, you can still find means of beating the Gardevoir, or simply only hitting a handful of them and still going deep into the tournament as well. Let's also make note of the Japan Championships in 2025. This, of course, was in the current Worlds format. So they were playing our standard event right now. And there were 4 Dragapults in the top 32 players here. And as you can see, not having the best of times. There was 1 Dragapult Charizard in top 8 of the tournament. And the rest of them were further down outside of that top 16, other than a Blaziken build, which did have Dragapult in it, but was really more of a Blaziken deck. So it looks like Dragapult, although was featuring heavily in the top 32, still didn't have that strong of a run in the Japan Championships, whether or not it was too heavily teched for, whether the metagame was a bit more volatile. You can see the other decks in top 32, lots of Raging Volt, lots of Gardevoir. Those aren't ideal for Dragapult builds. These are sort of regional metagame things to consider when looking at the Japanese data. Finally then, let's take a look at how the online scene is shaping up over the last couple of weeks. Of course, this is testing grounds for the World Championships, and at the moment, the straight Dragapult build has been the most popular. It's the 5th most popular individual deck, followed up closely by the Dragapult Charizard, and Dragapult Dustoir is the least most played of the 3. But still, overall, if you combine the Dragapult builds together, we're getting over that sort of 12%, so it would actually go over the top of Golden Go if you wanted to smash all the Pults together. So it's definitely worthwhile trying to play against the Dragapult builds and know how each of the matchups go, because it's going to be one of the most popular cards in the room, just broken down into different variants, I would say. Let's give a sort of broad stroke overview of how the big build debate shapes up then, because it seems like player base can't decide on which is the best route. First of all, we have just Dragapult, where you just have a handful of basic mates helping out here. This build gives you the most consistency because you're not trying to shoehorn in an extra stage 2 line, and you also have more space for tech. So if you want to play certain tech basic Pokemon, you can, but generally you have, firstly, an increased count of certain supporter cards as well as ball search cards. You're really maxing out those copies and giving yourself the best chance simply to get into the game, whilst at the same time having that room to have basic tech Pokemon, typically with abilities in here for certain matchups. And we'll get into the meat and potatoes of those a little bit more later on. Looking at the Charizard EX then, there are a lot of things going for Charizard, to be honest. I think giving yourself Gardevoir coverage is one of the sort of the key cornerstones of why this is powerful. Dragapult typically has a weak time, so having Charizard immediately brings that back into the balance, I would say, where they have one-hit KO options on you, but you have one-hit KO options on them. You sort of both have spread damage, you both have Monkey Dory available to you, that sort of thing. So already Charizard has a big bonus in that one of the key matchups of the meta is now more even. But at the same time, Charizard actually synergizes quite nicely with Dragapult because it provides energy acceleration. That can give you more breathing room to attach to your Monkey Dory naturally, which is one of the big sort of reasons why Dragapult naturally becomes way too powerful, is when there are also Monkey Dory coming involved into the Phantom Dives as well, or setting yourself up for Burning Darkness KOs. Speaking of which, in the late game, you have one-hit KO potential. Dragapult being hard capped at that 200 can sometimes be an issue where you simply can't deal with a crucial threat that has to be taken off the board in one go. Dragapult, combined with Charizard, however, now has this weird cat and mouse game plan where your opponent's trying to play around Burning Darkness having an easy one-hit KO route, or if they simply can't play around Charizard, this could be an end game where you've been tricky with Phantom Dive on single prizes early on, and then suddenly you're going smack Burning Darkness for the final like 3 or 4 prizes. So Charizard creates a really different dynamic in the deck just by having the ever-looming threat that Burning Darkness reaches one-hit KOs, especially when Phantom Dive can also set up multi-prize stage 2 Pokemon as well. And then finally, Dusknoir also has a lot of things going for it, but really it's just a versatile card. It gives you more board control generally, because you can target down things just much more aggressively earlier on in the game, I would say, because it also opens up the counter catcher for you as well. Typically, when you're coming up against setup deck into setup deck, your opponent's going to be teetering on whether or not they should take the lead. They'll only really do so if they have a well-built board established, knowing that a counter catcher can come back their way. Whereas Dusknoir just sort of says, no, you're going ahead and I'm going to use a Gusting card immediately now and completely, board wipe some evolving basic Pokemon all in one go, or take out a crucial EX immediately, things that your opponent wouldn't expect perhaps. So it just gives a lot of potential and a lot more flexibility naturally within the deck, which is really powerful. And at the same time, it gives you more manipulation with Iono. You can force your opponent down into even lower hand sizes to give yourself an even more reliable chance of disrupting the opponent as well, which again just leans nicely into this deck because it can play really well defensively, hoping that a Dragapult EX can stick if you're going to also use Curse Blast to get rid of key engine Pokemon, or be able to knock out Serendipity on a certain turn. All this sort of stuff can be really vital for you as well, whilst at the same time giving your opponent one less card before an Iono as well. One of the crucial new cards coming out from the new expansion is the Hilda supporter that allows you to search your deck for an evolution Pokemon and an energy card, reveal them, put them into your hand. Now, what's really interesting about Dragapult is that we know that there's going to be a high count of Iono. We know we're a great defensive deck, and it's already a good early game consistency card. We know we're playing a high count of Boss's Orders, because it's Gusting from a supporter. You have to play that, and it works really nicely with Phantom Dive to make the most out of our flexibility. And then we also know we're going to have an amount of Professor's Research, because Dump and Draw 7 is just naturally really, really powerful, and it's a big dig into the deck that we often need to have. But Hilda sort of fits in this interesting spot where we've seen a handful of other supporters in the past in sort of 1 and 2 counts, sometimes even higher in the case of Brock Scouting. Brock's interesting in that it's a superior supporter exactly on turn 1 if you're going second than Hilda, because it can grab those additional basic Pokemon. So it's like starting with a Buddy Buddy Poffin if you've gone second, and additionally we know there's a lot of Budew in the format, and there's also Friddish now coming out from Black and White as well, don't forget. So having a means of still getting your basics under item lock is a big bonus from Brock. However, we know as the game progresses, only finding one evolution is pretty mid, I would say, compared to Hilda, that can also guarantee those energy cards. And crucially, it can guarantee Neo Up Energy, the A-Spec that a lot of Dragapult builds, as long as they're not Charizard at least, will be gravitating towards, especially now that Hilda has been released. We have much more searchability to grab this Neo Upper when we want to and take advantage of it, because Dragapult needs to float those energy attachments to make Monkey Dory work, and with the amount of cards that can, well, archetypes that can one-hit KO Dragapult, with Golden Go, with Raging Bolt, with things packing Lily's Clefairy, a lot of decks can actually KO this Dragapult now. So having that Neo Upper to gain the extra attachment so you're not running out of Phantom Dives during the game, you can more or less, throughout turn attachments, get over the line when you include a Neo Upper and potentially Blood Moon as an endgame card. You can just about get away with it. So having Hilda gives you that reliability, whereas Brock feels really terrible in those sort of mid-turns. It's only really in situations where your hand has grown too big for a research, or you don't want to Iona the opponent because they're already stuck on a bad hand. It's kind of like the best of a bad bunch supporter, Brock. Whereas Hilda, I think you're like quite happy to see in the mid-game, where it is grabbing you those cloaks or is grabbing you up a Pult, and that can just be a massive swing turn, especially when you're facing down budges from opponents. Being able to grab those two pieces immediately is absolutely devastating. I think similarly the Jacques supporter is kind of being phased out. So Jacques can still be okay in Dragapult Dustoir builds, I think, just because simply grabbing more evolution Pokemon can sometimes be preferable over grabbing energy cards. But I do think Hilda is also pretty strong here, again, just for the access for Neo Upper. So I think of the bunch, Jacques is definitely on that lower rung, because it feels like way less useful, where similar to Hilda, it's not that good in the opening turn, whereas Brock is superior, and then Jacques is now also bested by the Hilda. So I think Jacques is basically always trimmed out of Draga builds these days. So then there's somewhat of a divvying up approach possibly between Brock and Hilda, but then also Arven has to be a question mark in the mix as well, where we know Arven can be very powerful for getting those early Buddy Buddy Poffins, and TM Evolution perhaps as well. Air Balloon is also a big tool card coming out in the Black Bolt White Flare expansions, which allows us to have extra maneuverability. Very good card in the Draga Charizard builds as well, because Charizard has that 2 retreat cost, and oftentimes you'll be hit with like Mind Bend from Monkey Dories in the Guardy matchup. So having access to your tools is pretty important. So having a divvy up of Arven being this early game for your basics, if it can grab Poffin, and then Hilda can be the mid game of grabbing evolutions plus energy, really keeps you ticking over quite nicely. So I think previously in the NAIC, we saw a bunch of 4 Iono and like 3 or 4 research, and then also a high count of Brock. I think there's definitely a place now where we have a trimmed count of Brock, a trimmed count of research, splashing in 1 or 2 Hilda. I think that's kind of the sweet spot for me. I have tried 4 and it felt like way too many, because it's still a fairly situational supporter card. But perhaps we can have a high Arven count coming back into some of the lists. I know Charizard is very high on Arven naturally anyway, but I feel like other builds, possibly even straight Pult, could go back to a quad Arven approach, now that Hilda can be that sort of middle ground, trying to play similar to that Brock Scouting, where it can grab your energy in addition to your evolution Pokemon. So this has been the main thing I've explored with Dragapult in the new expansion, just how many Hilda I should have, and where I trim the support account as it previously was to make the most out of it, because I do think it's really worthwhile within the deck. But like I said, more than likely just as a 1 or 2 count to give you some more reliability from Recon Directive, to give you access to Luminous and most importantly Neo Up Energy. Let's talk about filling those final few spots then, and I've tried to do a breakdown here. I hope this makes sense to you. On the top, I have the ones that could go in all of the builds of Dragapult, and then on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the ones that I think more specifically for a straight Dragapult. Kind of the ones in between the Psychic and the Dragon symbols here are ones that would be useful in Draga Dusk in addition to straight Pult. And then for the Psychic and Dark crossover, there's the Rare Candy that could be decent in both. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, it's tech cards that could go go into the Dragazard. I couldn't really think of a better way to do this, but I do want to talk about all the cards on the screen here and talk about their merits as well. So first of all, in the top left, these are cards that could go in all of the builds of Dragapult that we're discussing. Shaman, with that Flower Curtain, can protect ourselves against Grimmsnarl, also protect ourselves nicely against Gardevoir from Screamtail, and also protect against Baby Raging Bolt as well. There are a number of archetypes that do like to spread some damage right now. Protecting our non-rule box evolving Dracloak, most importantly, is going to be really important in pretty much every matchup, and this is potentially a Artisan searchable basic Pokemon. The only issue with Shaman is if you're not playing Artisan as your Stadium card and you're only really playing those Ultra Ball, it's very rare that you play more than one Nest Ball in the deck. It's hard to access this card unless you're playing Brock Scouting as well. So if you're playing Artisan or Brock, the Shaman gets much more realistic because it's a more easily findable card in the opening stages. If you're not playing either of those, I really wouldn't recommend the Shaman because it's not that easy to access. Kind of similar deal here with the Latias EX, where Skyliner can provide free retreat for your basics. This is really good in combination with Blood Moon Ursaluna, so I'm mostly looking towards the Dragadusk and the Dragapult here, but it's generally just a really versatile ability that can also get you into Budew earlier and more consistently. Once again, Latias is probably better if you're playing a Brock Scouting build, so you can again access this card alongside an additional basic in the opening turns. Mostly this gives you really good means of getting Itchy Pollen off, which is a pretty big deal. Speaking of which, Budew was one of these cards that I think was really close to being a core essential that just makes it into every list, but I've seen enough Dragazards that have not played Budew and just go down heavier Evo or just play Cleffa. But I think it's just about on the outskirts, although it's really heavily played. I think most of the list should be playing Budew. Just be aware that there are some builds that forego it just to have the second copy of TM Evo or this, that, and the other. So certain builds may go down a different direction. But Itchy Pollen is vital for Dragapult. It's pretty important for Dragadusk as well. I think it's only really Dragazard that doesn't consider this card too often, but then could still have it in the deck and it's still a really reasonable include. Because I think the Dragazard is the one that sort of has the most setup of the bunch, because you're trying to actually get multiple stage 2s into play pretty much every single game. Then there's Cleffa. I think this one is probably best in the Dragazard because it is the most setup intense. So having an easy means of getting these basics into play and then getting more cards immediately is a pretty good deal. It can just get you into your stage 1s and that really helps you get rolling. I think one of the most interesting debates I've been having in my own deck building has been Arven in terms of how many and how much I lean into this supporter card. Air Balloon is a big upgrade for some of the builds of Dragapults over the rescue board that was previously in some builds. And it's excellent with Charizard, of course, because now you can retreat that for free. And it's also pretty good at helping you move your ghosts as well, so you don't have to fear putting down your Dusclops, for example, in certain situations, because you know that rather than being forced to Curse Blast, you can also Air Balloon it out if you have to. So these are all benefits to you. TM Evolution already really good in Dragazard. I swear by having it in Dragazard, no doubt. But you could also see it coming into both the Dragapult and the Dragadusk builds. These other builds really had to protect their energy attachments that little bit more, and oftentimes spent their payment of retreat to go into Budew. But I do think that you can go TM Evo that little bit more often in these other two lists that aren't Zard, because you can reliably find that Neo Upper a lot quicker now. I feel like that is a worthwhile trade-off to get you earlier into those cloaks, especially because Arven has bigger upside now. If we're going quite heavy into Arven, you could consider the Ace Nullifier Genesect. This is a really powerful basic right now that can shut down Ace Specs from opponents. This can prevent the use of Neo Upper Energy in mirror matches. This can prevent Energy Search Pro from Golden Go. Anytime you can deny Grimmsnarl or Gardevoir a Secret Box, they're in shambles. And it can even deny the aggressive archetypes from Prime Catcher. The big question really is just how quickly and reliably can you find this Genesect in time? Again, it's one of those situations where Arven doesn't really find Genesect too easily unless you play Secret Box. Low-key, I have tried a Dragazard that plays Secret Box plus Artisan that can then get you Genesect immediately, and that has been pretty powerful, so just spoiler alert there. And perhaps this is worth considering again if you're going quite heavily down the Brock avenue, but still have like one or two Arvens so you can still grab some crucial tools and item cards during the game. Speaking of other interesting tools, Defiance Band can get you more creative with your math with Dragapults. It is pretty nice in Dragadusk because it makes Clops then be able to reach 280 with your Phantom Dive, which your opponent may not be expecting if they're Bravery Charming some EX Pokemon. And also I have got that cheeky handheld fan. I have actually been trying this out in a couple of my builds. Low-key handheld is pretty strong, to be fair. I think you can do some creative stuff. Again, I really respect the mirror match, and removing energy in a mirror is a really big deal. It can deny the opponent their use of Monkey Dory, which I think is, again, one of the bigger weapons that the deck has. And it also just makes awkward turns out of opponents. Now let's talk about the more deck-specific stuff then. I think with the space for Brock Scouting, the straight build can much more reliably play Maractus and Iron Bundle. I think if you are playing Maractus, you need to either be playing Arven Balloon or having the Latias in your list, so that you can pivot easily out of your Maractus when need be. Because sometimes you don't have to corner the entire game away, you just have to do it enough turns so that Dragapult can then buy its time, get back into the mix and Phantom Dive the game away once again. And then Iron Bundle, just a very strong card with so many archetypes relying on Countercatcher, and they know that you're reliant on Countercatcher, that they will, in some instances, set up damage rather than go for KOs. Having a bundle to force a push that, again, can be found via Artisan or Brock means you're not always crossing your fingers for boss on every single turn of the game. You can instead now have bundlers out to also push your opponent. It may not give you the optimal outcome, but it still gives you a good outcome by simply pushing a more heavily damaged Pokemon out of the way so Phantom Dive can sprinkle for the knockout. Down the middle, I do think it's pretty important for both the Dragadusk and the Straightpult to have some means of tool removal. The Tool Scrapper is a new inclusion from Black Bolt and White Flare. If you're playing Arven, I think Scrapper is slightly better than Jamming Tower, but if you're not playing Arven, then Jamming Tower seems to be the superior choice. It can stick around in the game for longer, and it's also naturally a bounce to basically any stadium that could be out there right now. And Dragapult really doesn't have much space to contest the Stadium War, so just having the one tower to throw down can be pretty handy. This is really important so that you can clear Aelia's Clefairy off the board in one attack. And Gardevoir has been known to play Bravery Charm, of course. Jamming Tower is also a pretty good card against Golden Go these days because they're so air balloon focused that you essentially deny some draw power from them if you're jamming away their air balloons during the game. The one tiny upside of Scrapper over Jamming Tower, however, is that you can remove opponent's Ace Nullifier. So if you think that's going to be a big tech card for the World Championships, maybe lean towards the Scrapper. Blood Moon Ursaluna is, of course, vital for both of these builds as well. It can be your final attacker. It's a bulky mon. It can attack for free or for one attachment. And it does feel like these Dragapult builds, specifically without the acceleration of a Charizard, do kind of dwindle and run out of their energy towards the late game. So oftentimes you're trying to sculpt towards Blood Moon being your final attack or two. Going towards the Dusk and Zard combination, I think Rare Candy is very easily justifiable. Even if it's a low count in the Dragadusk, I think that's okay. Again, if you're playing Arven, just one copy should be sufficient. Whereas if you're playing the Dragazard, you're almost always playing 2 copies of the Rare Candy, unless you're going really thick Charmeleon and double Evo. And then right now, Chi-Yu has been a really popular inclusion in Dragazard. It's been fringe in the past, but there's just enough Golden Go right now, and it's a decent card into Raging Bolt that it seems to have been picked up by a number of players. If you're expecting a drop-off of Golden Go after its popularity in the first couple of weeks of online data, perhaps it may not be worth the space, but I've always found this card pretty handy. And then Charizard, being the one that doesn't necessarily need to play the Jamming Tower, I think has the luxury perhaps of playing Artisan. Again, if you're getting really out there, I think a Secret Box is worth discussing compared to an Unfair Stamp. There's no doubt Stamp Disruption is very powerful, but I do think Box has its merits as well for helping you get into games, and again, giving you the option of Artisan Genesect can give you a different avenue of disruption as well, compared to an Unfair Stamp that your opponent may not necessarily be expecting. Now let's get into the matchup data of all the Dragapult builds. We'll start off with the straight build of Dragapult, and unsurprisingly the worst matchups are the Gardevoir ones, with Grimmsnarl also being mildly unfavourable. You have a bunch of pretty balanced matchups here, balanced into Dragadustawa, balanced into Charizard, balanced into the Flareon deck, Golden Go and Raging Bolt, with a slight edge into the Charizard build of Dragapult and into Joltik Box, with your best matchup right now coming out as Typhlosion. Dragazard seems to be the most 50-50 of the bunch, where it only has slight unfavourables into both Dragapult builds and has the more awkward Grimmsnarl, but balances out its Guardy matchup, now becoming both even. It's also even into the straight Zard, Golden Go, Joltik Box and Raging Bolt. Looks like Flareon gets a little bit easier because Charizard can pack a big punch, and the Typhlosion goes from a very favourable to still a pretty decent matchup. And we end on Dragapult Dustoir then. It doesn't do too much to fix its Gardevoir, although surprisingly its matchup into Gardevoir Jelly in the online scene has been slightly favourable, so make of that what you will. It's coming up slightly unfavourable into the aggro decks, the Joltik Box and the Raging Bolt. We finally balanced that Grimmsnarl matchup. We're also reasonable into the Straightpult, the Golden Go and the Flareon. You have a favourable time into Charizard, Dragazard, and again that Jelly Guardi. And once again, looking very favourable is the Typhlosion matchup. Ultimately, all three of them have a lot of viability. You can jump around a couple of percentages here and there, and you can see logically why they do jump from one category to another based on how these tech Pokemon can make a difference. So this is somewhat going to be a task of you metagaming correctly for the World Championships to make the right call of what partners, if any, to go in your Dragapult list. The first list I'm going to show is really based on Todd's NAIC 60 that he got top 4 with, where simply we've cut 1 Research and 1 Ultra Ball to add in 2 copies of Hilda. And I think that's a really easy thing to do here, because we're still yoinking all the work that Todd did, all the experience he came up with, all the testing he put in, and still creating essentially the same deck list, but saying that Hilda is worthwhile as a couple copies in here to guarantee that Neo upper. Part of the reason why Todd had the quad research was to dig far enough so that with recon directives and a 7-card dig from research, he had a decent chance of hitting that Neo upper. But as we saw on stream, sometimes he was just kind of whiffing it and then didn't really have much to do until he could research again the following turn. Hilda can really alleviate that issue. As you're reconning through the game, whenever you see that Hilda, you know that's a chance for a Neo upper, and that can really get that aggressive Phantom Dive going, and it can be a big saving grace for you. It also means that you recon directive a little bit differently as well. There are times now that you can be putting energy to the bottom a little bit more often with your recons, knowing that a Hilda can get you that card in addition to a Pokemon as well on a future turn, which is pretty interesting, to be honest with you. But we're still maintaining that really high Poffin scouting count, so we can get our Budju into the action early. We also have the Latias, Ursaluna, Maractus combo going on here. We have the double monkey still because prizing it's too painful. We're sticking with the jamming tower to give you a little bit of help against the Gardevoir matchup when we can. But essentially, Todd gave us a blueprint. Let's not overthink it. Let's try and be as consistent as possible and go far in the World Championships simply by getting into games. The other build that I've alluded to a little bit during the video has been a build weaving in TM Evolution. So this straight build of Pult is a little bit reduced in terms of the basic Pokemon, where there's only 1 Budju in here, and there's no Lati anymore because we're not playing the Brock. Instead, we're playing 3 copies of Arven, 2 Air Balloon, and 2 Hilda, in addition to those 2 Research, and there's also an Artisan in here as well. So it gives us a means of getting towards that Ace Nullified Genesect, and with the 3 Arven and 4 natural tools, you can nullify the opponent in a timely fashion whilst you're sort of going through the game. And let's face it, Arven is a really good turn 1 going second play, because it guarantees Poffin Balloon to get Budju, or it can go Poffin Evo to get straight into Cloaks, and in Dragapult mirror match situations, a big relief here is just getting your Cloaks online before your opponent can be launching those Phantom Dives, because they can starve you out of your attackers and chase your energy down. Now I think if you're Evoing into them, the Budju isn't that big of a sacrifice, because very rarely will you see Dragapult playing candies unless it's the Zard build. I think you get away with Evo quite often in those instances, and that just gets you into Neo upper, and then suddenly you're the one Phantom Diving first as well. So it's almost like trying to get the leg up without playing Rare Candy yourself. You'll also see the very cheeky handheld fan. Yes, I alluded to it as a tech, and I actually do believe in it. I think in this approach, it gives you an extra tool to play with Genesect, of course, but at the same time, when you're facing other Stage 2 matchups where Dragapult won't one-hit KO you and Grimmsnarl won't one-hit KO you, you oftentimes have these situations where the handheld fan is going to wreak havoc when you're just throwing these energy onto useless bench Pokemon for them, whether you've kept Budju around, whether it's Monkey Dora that's already got a Dark attached, or even if it has 1 Luminous attached, you can throw a second Luminous to it and deactivate it. It's so rude to make that play happen. Really, really cool card. Next up, we have a pretty vanilla list of Zard Pult, what I kind of expect the shell to be for players, where you simply take out the rescue board, add the air balloon, and then it's the shell that we've seen a number of times now. Chiyu is becoming more and more staple just based on the metagame, and Unfair Stamp can still really punish anyone getting too creative and trying to tackle your Budju early on because they're frustrated with Itchy Pollen. Naturally, the 2-1-2 Charizard and the 2 Candy eats up a ton of space, so there isn't much wriggle room for anything else here, and in this instance, Hilda isn't worth playing, because our A-Spec, of course, is changing here. Next up, I wanted to show you one of my homebrew builds of Dragapult with Secret Box as the A-Spec. Now, I was actually trying this out a lot heading up into the NAIC when I was thinking Watchtower was a really crucial tech card because there was more hype for the Flareon deck, there was more Terror Box, there was also more Raging Bolt Owls as well. Now, I think Watchtower may not be that mandatory, but I did just want to try Ace Nullifier with Secret Box because it's a really powerful option here. Arven can grab the box. Box can then get you a tool plus Artisan, then your Buddy Buddy Poffin and whatever else. But crucially, getting Tool Artisan gets you Ace Nullifier very, very quickly. So a turn 1 Arven can get you not only your Dreepy and your Charmander, but also an Ace Nullifier Genesect, and sometimes even you can still end in your TM Evolution, even with Ace Null coming into the mix. So very cool idea to try and weave in Genesect as early as possible. And like I said, Ace Nullifier, very, very powerful card right now. You have had to cut some corners to fit the box because we're trying to shove in the 3rd tool card, 2 stadium cards. There's not always any stadium in Dragazard. So we are going just 2 boss, 2 CC, just the 1 research. But of course, don't forget that Arven guarantees you another supporter card, so that's sort of alleviated a little bit. And as we know, Iono and Boss are still sort of the bread and butter supporters for this deck anyway as you progress through the game, so I don't think it's a huge concession to have here. And I remember testing Secret Box Arven previously in this deck, and I loved it, to be honest with you. Just giving yourself extra outs of that Evo, and now the added benefit of Genesect, oh, it's a really juicy list. I hope some people have been creative enough with Secret Box Overstamp, like we've seen with Grimstyle, like we've seen with Gardevoir. This A-Spec is just absolutely nuts, and I think because Genesect can be enabled by this one card, there's a lot of validity to it heading into Worlds where A-Specs like Neo Upper and like ESP, when those are taken away from decks, they are far, far less powerful builds. And we're going to end on Dragadusk, still sticking with the high research count, but simply slipping in a couple copies of Hilda, because it is a good enough supporter card to have here. I've tried to keep this deck pretty simplistic, because I think there's enough bells and whistles going on with the deck regardless, and ultimately you're a combo deck. With the build with Dusknoir, you naturally have a higher count of the Counter Catcher and a naturally higher count of Night Stretcher because you're blasting your guys and suddenly you can recover them anyway, and you're more willing to rip research turn by turn just so you can make your combo happen. Undeniably, this is the explosive build, if you'll pardon the pun, of Dragapult, so if you really like to take control of boards before your opponent has a chance to get fully set up, this is the one for you for sure. Now let's talk about the matchups in a bit more detail then. This is going to be a little bit tough because we're juggling 3 different builds at once, but naturally, some of the biggest hurdles that you have as a Dragapult player into Gardevoir is that Fairy Zone will allow their Psychic Mons to deal with Dragapult with ease, and there's that option for Bravery Charm. Now, crucially, that means if you're playing Dusknoir or Straight Pult, you need to try and keep track and access to your tool removal card if you're choosing to play the Jamming Tower or the Scrapper, whereas if you're playing Zard, you can easily KO a Clefairy, even if they are going to buff it with tools as well. Also bear in mind that Monkey Dory's in the mix. They can easily be playing TM Devo if they're a Jelly build, or if they're going to be having Fluttermane or whatever else in the deck, Klefki as well. Devo is becoming more prevalent in Gardevoir, so definitely be aware of that. And also be aware whenever you are trying to go ahead and punish your opponent from, you know, getting aggressive with the prizes, they also have Counter Catcher as well. The Charizard build has the best time here by far because you have easy access to dealing with Gardevoir if your opponent tries to get ahead, even with single prize KOs. You can really heavily punish that with the creation of your Zard. It's really about trying to maintain that stage 2, especially now with Air Balloon coming into the mix, your opponent having those panic Mind Bend plays are just far worse these days. They really are struggling if they're having to hit the Zard for 60 in Confusion. Yes, it means that the Gardevoir probably won't get bossed that turn, but it means you can pivot into another attacker with ease, and you don't lose your energy, the threat of the Zard, that you would otherwise previously have to do, even with a rescue board. So this matchup, I think, got even better for Dragazard into Gardy. So if you're really concerned about this matchup going into the World Championships, look towards the Zard approach. Otherwise, it's all about trying to find that 2 removal and make sure that Clefairy can't run away with the game. Ultimately, you are on the back foot in this one. If you're playing the Dusknoir, you can, of course, have situations where you high roll and can suddenly be Curse Blast, counter catching, getting rid of a Curlier and a Ralts, or double Curlier in some instances. Or if they are able to get into their stage 2, you can try and blast plus KO a Gardevoir as well with a Phantom Dive. So you can get creative with your ghosts. You do just have to be aware of how many prizes you are submitting to your opponent in doing these blasts. And as you launch Ionos against them, because yes, they don't really have much of a draw engine, but it doesn't take much of them to still take multi-prize turns with their own Monkey Dory shenanigans. The Grimstyle matchup, also a tricky one, definitely going to be a lot of damage counters flung around from Freezing Shroud, because your cloaks are naturally going to be ticking up, which is a big issue. Manually evolving into your Dragapult to deny your own draw power is often the go-to here. Even if you're not anywhere near attacking with this Pokemon, because you have to be aware of TM Devolution, there's too many easy situations where the opponent can line up their Adrenabrains and Freezing Shrouds appropriately so they can devo the one Pult that you have in play in addition to the Cloak that you have. And if you're not playing Rare Candy, suddenly they've just won the game on the spot because it's a turn of you not attacking once again, simply evolving into a Cloak that started to already get Freezing Shroud damage and whatever else. The opponent will then just Shadow Bullet the game away. So prioritize evolving all the way up to your Pults to protect around Freezing Shrouds and as best you can protect around TM Devo. The good news is, again, this is kind of an engineless deck. At most they play one Pheasantipity, so you can be on top of Iono here. You do have to be cautious of when you're attacking into those Grimstyle. If they just simply have too many Monkey established, it can be a real issue for you. Oftentimes looking to get around the Grimstyle with your high boss count and counter catches when possible is going to be the best MO here. If you're playing the Ghosts, even Dusclops into Monkey Dory is a massive line of play. Counter catching up Frostlass can sometimes really be worthwhile. These are the kind of things you have to keep in mind against Grim. Dragapult into its mirror match then. You have to be aware of Monkey Dory, of course. Keeping that in check from the opponent is massive because not only is it healing, but it also really threatens those cloaks specifically, right? So there might be situations where if you're taking a KO on the active with Phantom Dive, not putting 3 counters anywhere by spreading your Phantom Dive math, so your opponent can't go Phantom Dive back into you, plus Adrenabrain for 3 counters to KO your Cloak. That's something you have to think about. Alternatively, piling into a Monkey Dory can be a big deal. Definitely worthwhile counter-catching Monkey, oftentimes over a Cloak, I would say, as long as it's got energy attached. Also, you can pressurize your opponent's energy attachments by simply attacking into the thing that always has energy on it. So then they never have the chance to even attach to Monkey anyway because they're sacrificing a potential attack later down the line. Do bear in mind that the straight build of Pult is playing 1 to 2 Professor's Turo scenario as well though. So if you are being too defensive, trying to sit back on counter catches for too long, your opponent can punish this with their Turo. And be aware that Blood Moon Turo can definitely be a late game sequence for them. So if you're playing the Zard or the Dusk, try and prepare your board appropriately so you can hit into the 260. If you're playing the straight Pults, be aware that you can use your own Blood Moon plus Monkey to KO theirs. A pretty dynamic matchup, of course, with a lot of math involved. Try and keep on top of attachments, try and deny your opponent's Cloaks throughout the game and their Monkey Dory. These are the main tips I have. Dragadusk is similar, just bear in mind that they have this really short window to use their blasts. Duskull only have 60 hit points, so if they can't evolve these up in time, they're really dead cards in their own deck. This is one of those rare instances where I do think KOing Budju is worthwhile, like I said, so that their opponent has some downside to using their ghosts. Because giving them enough time and just sort of passing and chilling can really be punished because they simply will go find a ghost, use a counter catcher, take away Cloak that you've been slow attaching to. You really got to try and start launching pressure against this deck. And then into Dragazard, I think one of the big things to bear in mind is that Unfair Stamp is definitely going to be in the mix. Also be aware that they can very easily weave in Monkey Dory after an Infernal Rain, because that energy acceleration is really important. And also be aware of Burning Darkness slowly ticking over into that one-hit KO range, especially if they're getting creative with their Phantom Dive math, and rather than trying to target down your basic evolving Pokemon, they're trying to target down your EXs, especially if they're trying to board trap you out of Monkey Dory. Do be aware that you may want to hold off going full bench pre-Monkey Dory, because a Dragazard specifically can do a great job at not taking out anything and setting up Burning Darkness for, attack, 4 prize turn game plans with a checkmate scenario, because the Zard itself is so big. And if you deny Monkey Dory from the opponent already, the Dragazard is going to feel pretty ahead. Onto the Golden Go matchup, do be aware that they have a ton of healing cards with Monkey Dory, with Picnic, with Turo, with Moonlit Hill. So many means of them having healing that you really have to sort of over damage a lot of these Pokemon. Typically, doing the 206 immediately onto one Golden Go would be a good plan of attack, but you are potentially walking into a Turo or walking into a Picnic, which would be a shame. So just be aware that your opponent is likely going to wipe some damage off that board, and over damaging some of these Pokemon is definitely worthwhile with your own Monkey Dory. But in the same breath, Golden Go is very rarely going to give you that opportunity because they're going to be looking to take one-hit KOs. Definitely one of the situations where spamming the Iono is still your best friend, and that Unfair Stamp if you're playing the Zard build. Speaking of which, Zard helps you reach one-hit KOs on Dengo, so too do the Ghosts. It's really the straight build that has the toughest time here. Previously, straight Pult had the backdoor win condition of Budju, but I really think that's fallen by the wayside with double Turo in the list now, and the fact that some of these builds will also play Levincia as their stadium. They can find a way around that late game Budju once your opponent has commit too many resources. Also be aware of Scizor as well. You play lots of Cloak, you have lots of abilities on your Ghosts and other Mons sitting on the bench. The Punishing Scissors actually is a genuine threat, and 140 hit points is kind of obnoxious. It's like too much damage for you to really try and sprinkle down with Phantom Dives. So you kind of have to go through it as well. So just be aware that this can be a threat if you start seeing that Scyther. Raging Bolt has a few hiccups as well. Be aware of Judge for hand disruption and be aware of Turo Scenario that could undo some of your damage. If they're playing an Owl build, they're quite likely to play the supporter. Baby Raging Bolt is of course a threat as well, as they can target down key Pokemon, so spreading your attachments and not going all eggs in one basket is important here. And generally having the policy of just getting an extra copy of the basic you want down is important. Raging Bolt naturally can reach that really high damage output, so targeting down the energy that retain on the board is still going to be important here, and setting up 4 prize swing turns with Gust is going to be huge, so you can play around Pheasantipity EX when you can, so your hand disruption can really pay off. Into Joltik box, they are literally a deck full of threats. Iron Hands is annoying in the opening stages, Clefairy can one-hit KO you and can be burst on the board from a Crispin, and Iron Leaves can be a pivot that gets around Maractus as well as being a one-hit KO option on Charizard, so their number of weaknesses plus their just early game aggression is definitely a headache. Again, it's an instance where you can set up damage on these EX Pokemon. Be aware of your counter catchers and boss, because Clefairy is a kill on sight kind of card. If you're playing the Zard build, Chi-Yu can get revenge on Iron Leaf, so that's something to bear in mind. Once again, it's trying to deal with their Mew whenever you have the possibility, in addition to the Pheasantipity, and playing around it as best you can so that these hand disruptors really try and do their best. Similar to Joltik blocks, Flareon is going to be an awkward one. Leafeon provides grass coverage if you're playing the Zard. Also, Moss Agate has a huge healing effect, 100 from each of your bench Pokemon. So it's definitely a situation where you want to target down, EVEX or basic EVs if they are starting to use Flareon to power up benched Mons. Sylveon EX or even just Lily's Clefairy in the deck can be beat sticks that can KO you. And as always, this is a Noctowl deck that has Briar, so you're typically looking to set yourself up to go down to 1 prize card, then close the game on the following turn, or take a 3 prize card swing to deny their use of Briar. Next up, there's Typhlosion. This can be a dodgy matchup. 320 is quite an easy number for them to hit. It only takes Gravity Mountain or Bangle if they have a Victini down, or both the tool and the stadium can get the job done as well. The good news here is Dragapult is very good at targeting down the threats. Yes, they have fairly high hit points, the 70 from Cyndaquil, the 100 from Quilava, and naturally trying to spread this damage plays into Picnic Basket. But I think you can very easily deny Pidgey from the opponent if they're going down the Pidgeot route. And if they're playing the Cloaks as well, you can typically find ways of dealing that 90 with your own Monkey Dory. It's very often when I run into Typhlosion that I just keep trying to charge down the evolution line, and they eventually sort of sputter and run out of attacking threats. Almost always been my experience with the Typhlosion matchup. If you're playing Charizard, it's kind of the most difficult one for them to reach. If you're playing the Ghosts, you should find a really easy way to take out multiple of their evolutions and put them into a really weird spot with Iono as well. Next up, Zard Pidgeot. Just be aware that they have lots of healing again. Monkey Dory, Picnic Basket. If you're getting creative with your math, you really have to almost be happy to waste damage here to play around your opponent quick searching these cards out. The big takeaway is that you can't really allow a Charizard to be a late game checkmate option, especially if you're lacking the one-hit KO yourself and are just playing a straight Pult. If you're playing your own Zard or your own Dusknoir, you should be sort of having a cat and mouse with them regardless. But the takeaway really is just don't let one Charizard get carried away with the game, because you got too excited taking out lots of basics as you went and ignored the big guy. That's it for Dragapult then. Lots of interesting lists, lots of discussion around Hilda, which I think is a really exciting supporter card from the set, and changes up what is one of the strongest archetypes in the game, split into 3 ways. What's your favourite way of playing Dragapult? What do you think is going to do the best at the World Championships? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.